I thought I'd do a couple things here today. I was asked both to give the context of the White House, and I think people that are familiar with the way it works over in DC, it's not unusual for the White House to task a department or agency or someone like me to do their work for them. So I'm very comfortable speaking for them on their behalf. So I thought I'd set the context a little bit about what's going on in Washington on this topic of cybersecurity and particularly critical infrastructure, and then talk a little bit about the work we've done over the last 2 years, and then really try to keep my remarks relatively short so that we have time for a good discussion. But I really do appreciate Automation Federation including me. We've actually done a couple of these throughout the country, oftentimes partnering with manufacturing extension partnerships, which we'll hear a little bit more about later in the day, but often at community colleges around the country, just talking about the people that have their hands on their technology, the people who are doing this work every day, what their priorities, what their goals are, and really the things that we can work on together. So it's actually a pretty interesting week for us on this topic. Not only is it 2 years that we've been doing this work since the President announced the executive order on improving critical infrastructure cybersecurity, but also later this week, the White House is holding a summit on cybersecurity and consumer protection out at Stanford University. And it's the first time I think the White House has had an event like this that will be so large and widely attended. And they're going to bring a lot of government officials with them and really have a really good discussion on what are the priorities, what are the things that should be worked on, and covering topics ranging from improving cybersecurity information sharing between the government and the private sector, and also just ways to enable it better between industry, to how do we improve adoption of more secure payment technologies. So, and some of the concerns that we've seen in the massive data breach over the last couple of years. And this is all in the context of really what the top priorities are for the White House and this administration in this area. The top one, the topic that we're talking today, is protecting the country's critical infrastructure from cyber threats. The second thing is improving our ability to identify and report cyber incidents so we can respond in a timely manner. How do people know what the right roles and responsibilities are? Who should they engage with when an event occurs? Engaging with international partners to promote internet freedom and build support for an open, interoperable, secure, and reliable cyberspace. That's been a big issue with the transition of the IANA contract and thinking about how the internet is governed overall. The fourth one, securing federal networks by setting clear security targets and holding agencies accountable for meeting those targets. The massive breaches that we've been seeing, that hasn't only been in the private sector. The public sector has been hit just as bad. So thinking about ways to shore up those networks. And then the last one, which again relates to what we're talking today, is shaping a cyber-savvy workforce and moving beyond passwords in partnership with the private sector. That's actually another major initiative we have at NIST called the National Strategy for Trusted Identities in Cyberspace. So with that context of sort of what we're all working on, the Commerce Department, which NIST is a part of, then has its own mission to promote the foreign and domestic commerce of the United States. And so when we think about the digital economy, we think about how do we grow cybersecurity policies that protect that growing digital economy that doesn't grind the gears, and we see that as a vital part of our mission. And really, how do we achieve the right balance of increasing how we manage cybersecurity risks with the benefits that we all see every day from leveraging the internet and increased information technology. So that's really a key part of what we do under Secretary Pritzker in that mission of promoting growth, creating jobs, and retooling the economy. And I think all of the projects that we work on reflect that commitment. How do we harness the private sector's creativity and ingenuity and promote novel technologies and policy solutions to better to resolve these pressing cybersecurity challenges. So with that, I thought I'd talk just a few words about the role of NIST, which is a kind of a unique institution. I think a lot of times when we go out there, people don't often realize that it's even part of the federal government. And in some ways that makes sense. At NIST we have about 3,000 employees, but then we have about 2,700 associates and facility users. So that means for basically the folks that I work with, for every one that is a government employee, we have someone who's coming from the private sector or academia, and we're really working collaboratively. And our overall mission is to assist in maintaining weights and measures. Probably separate from cybersecurity, the thing, and the work we do in manufacturing. We're pretty well known for maintaining the atomic clock out in Boulder. And that's something that helps synchronize clocks around the world billions of times a day, and it helps secure transactions. But then we have a range of projects that relate from biometrics, smart grid, big data analytics, cloud computing, encryption, quantum physics, and the identity work that I mentioned earlier through NSTIC. And then we have a responsibility in developing standards and guidelines for federal information systems. So those special publications or interagency reports, the SPs, as folks know them, provide operational, management, and technical security guidelines on a range of topics. Because we develop these standards and guidelines collaboratively with industry, and because they're freely available, they're used throughout the world. And then we have another responsibility to encourage and coordinate development of relevant standards, as well as promoting coordination between the public and private sectors and the development of standards and conformity assessment activities. So that guides a lot of the work that we have done with Automation Federation and on the IAC and ISA standards. Federal government, the US government is unique, and this is something that I think a lot of people don't realize, and that for everything we do, there's a law that says we have to rely upon voluntary consensus standards. So we turn to the standards bodies first to figure out if they have a standard to meet those needs on any topic. And NIST really has the role of helping that coordination and making sure that there are standards for us to rely on. Because we strongly believe that the availability of the standards and the associated conformity assessment programs are essential for those efforts. And being able to deploy those security solutions throughout the world and build trust is really the path we're going to need to take to help manage this problem. And so with that context, I thought I'd talk about the executive order and really the theme of the cybersecurity framework and why we're here today. The executive order came at a time after a long policy debate, one that I meant that actually I worked on back in my time working for Senator Lieberman, and I'll thank Tim for the promotion. I was a staff member, not a legislative director. Next time. But really, there were a couple topics that that policymakers were trying to figure out, and one was we have existing standards, we have existing best practices. What are the things we can do so that they're more widely used and accepted throughout industry? And that was really a main piece of the executive order from 2013. And that gave NIST the task to run that and develop it in something called the Cybersecurity Framework. The other pieces of the executive order, which are obviously still things we work on today, were increasing the flow of threat information from government out to industry. That's something I think you'll hear the Department of Homeland Security and FBI talk a bit about. They have been able to increase the sharing of that information. And then thinking about how do we protect privacy and civil liberties as we think about cybersecurity. I think people often think about data security and say, well, if you have good cybersecurity, then you must be doing pretty well in privacy. But I think a lot of us know that it's not that simple. And we really do have to think about privacy protections in the context of that strong cybersecurity program. And so drilling down the framework, what we were asked to do is to work with industry, and we saw our role really as a convener to figure out what standards, guidelines, and best practices could be used more widely, And then, and while we're doing that, what are the next steps? Where are the areas that there's still more work to be done? And what are those challenging things where there might not be standards or best practices? And we were also, it was also very much spelled out that while we were doing this, we had to think about the environment that these companies operated in. Critical infrastructure itself, when we think about it, we think about networks and systems that are vital to the national security and economic stability of this country. And a lot of those organizations have regulatory and legal challenges. So we were not asked or regimes. So we had to make sure that whatever we developed could be actually put into practice and not something that would sit on a shelf as something that would have been nice to do if the world existed a little differently. So we had to consider those things. We had to make sure it was technology neutral. And the other thing is it was very clear in the executive order, and something we thought was very important is that it had to remain voluntary. If we moved down another path, then we thought we would face difficulties in making sure that we could have the discussions we needed to have with the maximum number of stakeholders. So we'd bring these people in, and we'd talk about what their needs were, and then we'd develop something that we'd hoped would be could help with prioritization, but would remain flexible and help deal with emerging threats, vulnerabilities, and overall risks. So over the course of 2013, what we did is we had a series of workshops around the country. Automation Federation was very much a partner in those efforts. We estimate that we engaged with more than 3,000 people, submitting hundreds of comments. We had a series of drafts throughout the year. We even put out an outline for people to comment on. And given that we were talking about an area that was as broad as critical infrastructure, which would naturally involve very large multinational companies, but also small, regional, local companies, we had to ask a lot of questions to figure out, was there a structure, were there things that we could do that would be broadly applicable to those very different sorts of organizations? And we heard some things. I mean, we heard there was a degree of consensus pretty early on that many organizations face similar challenges. There's a challenge in communicating cybersecurity risk throughout your organization and also in between organizations. There are challenges finding the right people and making sure that they're trained. That's a challenge that we heard particularly in this space, in the industrial control system space. We heard about needs for industry-driven conformity programs. And then we also heard a lot about I need the ability to be able to assess where I am today and figure out where I need to go in the future and plan accordingly. Those were all concepts that were laid on the table very early on and really drove us as we thought about how do we show the existing standards and guidelines that exist today that can help meet those goals. And so at the end of the day, the course of the year, what we came out with was a relatively short document, 41 pages. That was another comment we received, to keep it short, that really tries to serve as a structure to help bridge some gaps that existed. Gaps between business leaders and information security professionals, and making sure that there was a common language and approach to talk about cybersecurity. And I would say that a key construct here, which is something that people in this room I think understand a lot better than people that focus more on the IT space, is that there's no threat proofing here. Similar to a safety culture, you don't want incidents to occur, but you plan for them to occur, and then you manage them. So we talked a lot about that to the executives, that this is not a problem that can go away. It's one that we really need to manage with that cycle of measure, assess, improve, and correct. A line that we used a lot and that we still use is this is about building an immune system. It's not trying to end all disease. And so the structure that we think about when we talk about the framework is taking these existing practices, the ones developed by Automation Federation and ISA, and ISO and others, and to put it in a higher level, what we call functions, categories that would be easy for anyone to understand, of identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. And so with that structure, with that ability to communicate the individual controls, then you can think about how do you take those outcomes, and how do you then take the more detailed standards and guidelines that have existed for years and build a program, or show the strengths of your program, or try to improve your program. And so, and one key topic that we had again was this difference between the information technology and operational technology or industrial control systems, in that while outcomes are similar, there's going to be very different considerations here, given the potential for the direct effect on the physical world and the potential risks for health and safety of individuals and the impact of environment in operational technology. And so once we took those high-level functions, and then we could talk about the outcomes that you seek to achieve in a security program, then we could point all the way down to the standards developed by the thousands of people out in industry that will give you the more technical guidance to use. So for the framework, we chose 5 that were basically our stakeholders told us, and our comment periods were used most widely throughout industry. ISA, IEC 62443, ISO 27000 and RUN, COBIT, the critical controls, and NIST 853. So that really becomes the foundation of how people can think about how to use the framework as guidance. And our hope is that with that flexibility, then institutions from small to large can look at the core, what we call the core that has those functions, and then tailor it to their individual needs, understanding their own unique business requirements, risk tolerance, and resources. And they can do that through another feature of the framework, which is what we call the framework profile. And so that's where we were about a year ago, and that was the document that we presented. And what we've really done over the course of the last year is to continue our work with industry and with stakeholders to understand what is it that we should be doing next. And one item that we also released with the framework was something that we called our roadmap. So those areas where best practices might not exist. And those are some other high priority areas that we're working on with standards bodies, with the research and development communities, and with industry, things like authentication, things like privacy engineering, things like the international aspects. And then as we're doing this, we're also increasing our work through something that we recently started at NIST called the National Cybersecurity Center of Excellence, which is a large applied cybersecurity lab where we're bringing in industry to really think about how do we promote the widespread adoption of cybersecurity technologies. And really our goal there is through the partnerships that we have, and we have 19 companies that are providing their products, we can show how to build these products together and show how products with those attributes with the attributes, when they work together, can build that secure platform. And we think that by doing that, by showing these use cases, we can show these integrated solutions based on commercially available technologies that companies can then pick up and use. So we have a range of things that we're working on there, and we think it's a pretty unique opportunity. We don't think there's anything really like it that can bring experts together from industry, government, and academia to build these practical, interoperable, and usable cybersecurity solutions. And then as Tim mentioned, one of the other things that we're doing is making sure that internationally what we've done with the framework is understood. I think stakeholders often don't understand how a voluntary approach could be strong. And the fact that we have the wealth of standards and conformity assessments, that really is what helps give the global reach to policies like this. So we've talked to stakeholders really throughout the world, UK, Ireland, Greece, Germany, Italy, Belgium, China, Japan, South Korea, Australia, and Estonia. We've gone and talked to them, and we've hosted quite a few other people to make sure that as we in governments think about these cybersecurity policies, that we don't create trade barriers, that we don't create unnecessary blocks, and that we really are thinking about how do we make sure that we have a truly interoperable international environment for all of our companies to do business in. And we're also have been spent since the year that the framework's come out really trying to understand how people are using it. Often NIST puts out reference material and it's used in very different ways than we expected. That atomic clock, every time it goes out there and it's synchronized a little better, it's used it's used in different and unique ways. And that's similar to what we're seeing in the framework. While we expected and we hoped that a wide range of companies would begin using it within their organizations, which we have seen quite a bit of, from small companies all the way out to large multinational companies. We're also seeing technology companies providing products more closely aligned to things in the framework. We're seeing communities and interests and associations coming together to provide practical advice for their particular audiences. The electric sector worked with our colleagues at Department of Energy to come out with electric sector specific guidance, really tying it to that sector's unique needs. And similar things have happened in the financial and telecommunications sector. And even things like the insurance community have begun to offer policies tied to the framework. The insurance community, when they're giving out their policies, they like to see that their organizations have good cybersecurity programs, and so they're using it to help evaluate the strength of their clients' programs. And so that's something that we're very much interested in learning. We've also made it very clear that this is a living document informed by the experiences of people using it. So we hope to continue to have these conversations to understand what current needs are. And then in the future, we intend to do two things. We intend not only to update the framework when there has been a sufficient amount of time, but then to think about what is the long-term governance of this public-private partnership. Similar to our work under Smart Grid, should we move it out to a non-governmental organization where they can manage it and update it according to industry's needs? And so that's really our view of the future. And our hope is that it continues to be a useful tool for organizations, that it's something that can be built into business-to-business relationships, and that it really helps improve the improve the resilience of critical infrastructure on this really challenging area. So with that, I look forward to the Q&A. I really do invite you to take a look at some of the material that we have up on our website. You can actually look back and see we have webinars from all of our workshops. We have about 500 comments from industry and other stakeholders about what they felt was important. We maintain that on our website. And we really do invite you to reach out and let us know what your priorities are, what your challenges are, and the things that we should be doing to help you manage those challenges. So I thank you again, and I'll turn it over to Tim.